I started to tell about another time that a guy come wheeling in front of the office at the station, and I went out to check and see what he wanted, and he wanted to know if he could cash his Christmas bonus check, and so I took it and walked in and showed it to Joe. Old Joe was talking with somebody in the office there, and Joe took a hold of it and he looked at it and he said, "Yeah, okay." And so I put it in the till, give him $5, and it was a $5 check. And of course, it was one of the early times when they did this sort of thing. It was one of those legitimate-looking checks, only it was a $5 discount check where you could get $5 off if you bought some furniture or something in this place. Joe didn't see the fine print till the next day. He came out to me and he says, "Is this what we cashed?" We give him $5 for this. I said, "Well, yeah." I said, "You approved it." Of course, I made my share of goof-ups and mistakes on a number of times. Most of the time, it was on my own car. The things that I can remember that I goofed on it for a customer was like doing an oil change over the pit, and not remembering to put the drain plug in and fill up the engine with 5 quarts of nice fresh oil, and then find out that it all ran on the floor in the drain pit. And then I guess one of the other things I can remember that on a customer's car was when it was on a Sunday actually, and I was at the garage doing something on my own car, some little thing, and a guy pulled in, and his generator was out, and so he, there wasn't anybody around to fix it, and he was from Mankato, and kind of desperate, so I said, "Well, I'll see what I can do." So I pulled it off and repaired it, and I was so proud of myself. I did a real good job on the thing, and put it in and worked like $1 million, and he took off, and the next day I come to work, and Joe says, "Come here." And went back out in the shop on a bench, and here's 2 long generator bolts. He says, "You know where these came from?" And oh my God, here I'd overhauled that generator and forgot to put the 2 lock bolts in the thing, and I don't know how I ever got it together and mounted in that without them, but I did it. And the guy just barely got home with the thing, and it of course fell apart, and so we were Joe had to buy him a new generator, and so that was a bummer. But one of the serious things I did on my own car was I like the 36 Ford. When I getting it ready for winter, I wheeled it in on the pit and drained the transmission oil. It was a straight stick job, and I took out the heavy oil and put in the light winter oil, and wheeled it out of there and went home and ride, and I think I went out to like White Bear, some place like that, and circled around and got wheeling back into Minneapolis, and all of a sudden I went to shift gears and bang, and it clashed real bad and started growling, and so I nursed it on home, but what had happened was I forgot to put the fill plug in, so that after I filled up the transmission and started driving without the fill plug, it eventually slung it all out and got hotter than heck, and it wrecked it. So that meant I go to the junkyard, and it cost me $40 for a used transmission, and of course $40, that's like 400 or 500 right now. But anyway, that was one of the deals I did. I was in a hurry, and learned the hard way on that one. Actually, the most trouble I had when I first started driving a car was I had got it started out with a 31 Pontiac. Well, actually, outside of a bad wrist pin in the engine, the thing was not too bad. The way I drove it was something else. If I'd have had sense enough to drive it slow and easy, it was probably would have lasted a long time. But the first problem was I couldn't get gasoline, so I was forever buying this what they call the stove gas. It was a naphtha gas. Actually, it was more like a cleaning fluid, and Joe had a pump for that out there. A lot of guys would stretch their gas by using getting like 5 gallons of regular gasoline, and then maybe 5 gallons of naphtha to mix with it. That's the way I worked it most of the time. But when you got an older engine with lower compression, cold operation wasn't too great. It was fine for wheeling out on the highway, but anyway, I'd end up with foul spark plugs and hard starting, and so that was a problem. And then of course I always had to go wide open, and wherever I went on the highway, and the bearings were a little bit loose, and so the babbitt would chip away a little bit, and when the particles of babbitt would collect up at the oil pump, the drive gear that would drive the oil pump also drove the distributor, and when the pump would jam up with babbitt, it would strip the gear on the distributor, and of course it wouldn't run. So I'd have to pull out the shaft, put a new gear on a distributor, and get going again until the next time. But I'd end up having to overhaul the engine and take care of the bearings and whatnot. And so I was having a lot of experience with repairing that old Pontiac engine. Of course, one of the reasons for having a car, girlfriends, and so when we weren't out chasing a bottle of beer or out on a hunting trip or fishing or something, us guys all chasing girls. But one of the things you'd probably be interested in was a time when Arla's brother Ray he was a buddy of mine, more or less. He lived down the block, and he was always a big deal and rides with me to school and so forth. And he was a good guy, a little younger than me, but he was real likable and helped me out pushing the car to get it started or whatever. And anyway, one time I think he gave me a call. He had there was a couple of girls from Mankato that were visiting him, and he had met her down there, and she had a girlfriend with her. And anyway, he wanted to know if I wanted to go with him to a movie with this other girl. So okay, and so that was a connection. Well, those girls were going on home the next day or so, and but there was going to be a dance in Mankato the following weekend, and so anyway, Ray and I were going to go down and meet him at the dance hall, and the way things turned out, Bernie Schmidt went along with me, and I think Ray was going to be down there too. Anyway, the connections didn't come about. Just something happened. They goofed up, and so Ray and Bernie and I ended up. We were going on and we're going to give Arla was supposed to pick up Arla down there, and she's going to ride home with us. And so as it turned out, anyway, it turned out that Arla rode with us, and she was. Let's put it this way, I smooched with Arla on the way home, and so it was where we started to get acquainted, and it was a case where we'd got together. There was times when the Winch family would be up visiting, and so I got acquainted with them and so on too. And so I had this 49 Indian motorcycle that we go for little rides and whatnot. And I got to tell you about that, how I got that Indian, though. When the war was over, Darlene's husband, Clayton Charlie, started working as a conductor on the streetcars, and it just so happens that one of the other conductors from that shop he worked out of had got out of the service, and he bought this brand new Indian, I think it was Indian Scout, a motorcycle, all decked out with the lights and the bags and the whole paraphernalia. And he had driven it. I think he had something like 50 miles on it, and he told Charlie, he mentioned he wanted to sell it to Charlie, and because he says he was scared of motorcycles. He thought he wanted one, he bought it, but he just scared to death of the thing. And so he asked Charlie if he wanted it, and Charlie said no. And Charlie called me up and said, hey, I got a motorcycle down here. This guy's got this thing that's like brand new, and all you have to do is take over the payments. And so I said, well, I'd like to look at it. And so he comes wheeling up to the station in that motorcycle. He climbed off from it, he propped it up, and he said, you want it? Here it is. Here's the bank book. Just finish paying for it. And so I did. It still smelled like brand new, and it got me started on a motorcycle, and it was a case where in those days that motorcycle was it sold for like, I think it was $950, and he had paid on it, paid down on it, and so on to where it was. I think there was like $550 left on it, and so I took over the payments and paid it off, and I had that motorcycle, and it really was a real doll. I had tough luck. The only real problem that developed was when I was driving a dirt road over by Columbia Park, where they were having a carnival, and they were using this back road, and it was kind of a sandy road, and anyway, there was a rock in the middle of that road, and instead of driving in the ruts, I tried to drive the median between the two ruts, and I knew I hit something, but I didn't know that I poked a hole in the transmission underneath, and of course let out all of the oil. It wasn't the transmission; it was a primary drive case, and let the oil out of it, and everything was working fine. I didn't know anything. So the next day, when I was going down to Waseca, after I got about halfway down, the chain started to rattle, and of course when I pulled into Waseca and started checking, I found out what happened, and so I had to plug up that hole a little bit and dump some oil in it, and made it back home all right, but it had a noisy chain for a while until I got a new chain and case cover for it. But other than that, the thing was, a real doll. Getting back to Arla and our connections, I don't remember exactly. Don't remember what year it was, but it wasn't too long after I met her that I got a call from Mama Selma. I think it was her. It might have been Clarence, but one of them called me and said that they had a problem, that Arla was supposed to go to this, was scheduled to go to this school dance, and that there was a problem with the boy that was supposed to take her, and that he was wondering if I would take her, and so formal dance deal of some kind, and that didn't bother me, but I really didn't have anything fancy to wear, so Ma said, well, wear Pa's suit. And so Pa's suit fit me fairly well. But wouldn't you know, when we go down to pick up Arla, Faye and Lenny are there, and of course, Caddy Faye has got to say, well, isn't that your dad's suit? Well, yeah, it is. And so it just was the case where she showed her colors real quick like. But anyway, we went to the dance, and it was a case where we had a good time, and that was about it for a while. We'd see each other off and on here and there, now and then, whatnot, and so it was a case where I had a number of girlfriends, and I wasn't anything serious with any of them for a long time. As far as my high school years, my education was something else. I was one that I didn't have accommodations at home for bringing home homework and doing it, and I didn't want to do it in the first place, and so what it amounted to is that I usually paid enough attention in class that I pretty much got my education from the teachers, and what reading and classwork I did in each class, that was it. And if I didn't learn it, or if I was absent, I lost it. So it was a case where I just got by, and that's about it. I wasn't. If I was interested in something, I learned it and remembered it. That was about the only thing that I can say about school that was a plus, was that I usually remembered what I learned, but I didn't bother learning much. Anything that didn't interest me was something else. But anyway, I got by. I guess I was somewhere around 51, 2 or 3 out of 115 or something like that in the class when I graduated. But I sure wouldn't brag about that. But anyway, I did have some fun times, and when I started out, Daune, Chucky, and I were going to go out for football, and so we showed up early and got in on the practice runs and so forth, and we got far enough that when we started scrimmaging, I was like Todd, you know. I like to hit and I like to tackle, and so I was picked out right away and told that that they were going to have a place for me in the game, and so old Pete Dinovic, him and old Jolf coaching football, and they had taken me aside to talk to me, to get me to stay with football, because they heard that I was quitting, and like I told them, I've got this, at that time I still had my paper route, and I couldn't hack that in football too, and it was a case where I didn't have any money, and money was important, and so anyway, I dropped the football. Same way that I dropped the tuba in the band. I had learned to play the tuba, and the band director wanted to switch me to the big sousaphone, the big tuba, and that would have been all right, except the fingering was different. And hell, it took me long enough to get the fingering down for that small tuba. I said, the heck with it. I'm not going to bother with the big one. Then I didn't have that much time. So I dropped that, and just resigned to schooling, and then part-time work, and then chasing at night with the car, and so that was mostly how I went through school, and I can't say that I regret it. I had a pretty good time, and I managed to get through. I don't know of anything really too great one way or another in school. I guess one teacher was an English teacher that bugged me so bad that I dropped out of her class. That was in 11th grade, and I dropped out of her class and took summer school, and that was kind of a plus, because in summer school I went to the University of Minnesota, and old Charlie Sheridan, and then there was an Erickson, Beverly Erickson, I think her name was. They had done the same thing, and so all three of us rode over to the school together, and it only took something like 3 weeks or something like that of summer school at the university, and it was a case where they had a co-English and history course that we had to learn. We had to learn the history part, and then adapt it to English so that we could narrate it. Each one of us had our own deal to learn, and then we had to give an orientation on it, and forced to talk to in front of these about 60 college students that we had to put this across to, and so when you got to stand up in front and pull this off in front of them in order to graduate that class, that was more for me than a lot of the high school education, and so it gave me the ability to be a little more outgoing, and so not that I ever accomplished anything, but it was enough that I felt that I learned a lot. It's one thing to be able to pass a test and put down on paper and in a notebook and that what the teacher wants, but it's another thing to be able to live your English through life. I guess what it boils down to is communication, and so I felt that I've been able to communicate enough to get by with. I just remembered one of the funny things that happened in the start of high school, when in ninth grade, when Rodney Sahlstrom had a science class, and the first day in science class, Rodney, we had a whole room full of kids, and most of us didn't know each other or anything, but anyway, he asked Lorraine Popowski, her name was at the time. She married Bob Clark eventually, but anyway, she was Lorraine Popowski, and he asked Lorraine to look around the room and pick out the boy she figured be the smartest one in the class. Wouldn't you know, she picked me. But she to this day, you ask her how about me in school, and she'll tell you I bluffed my way through most of it. But it was a case where I just learned enough to get by, and she knew it. But anyway, that was one of the funnier things that happened. The first couple of years in high school was we were still at war, and one of the other things that took place was Paulie Wykor played a trumpet in the band, and so when somebody from the Heights, one of the boys would be killed in the war, they would have taps. He would play taps in the hallway of the high school, and that was something I can't forget either. Paulie Wykor, incidentally, was the photographer for the school, and he went into photography, and he took pictures of our wedding, and he took the pictures at all of our reunions, except for the last one. He died before he made our 50th anniversary reunion, and so that was another bummer. Actually, another funny thing was Paulie Wykor's brother, Jimmy Wykor, was another one that got flunked out of old Eddie Milbrath's English class, and he went on to become the owner of a radio station down in it was down by Worthington, Marshall or Worthington, one of those towns, and he had a big time station down there, and he had a beautiful voice for it, and so it was kind of ironic that he flunked out of her English class, but yet he used more English than most anybody in the rest of the school before he got through. And he let her know at one of the reunions years later. There was an all-class reunion, and he really put a dig into her about her English class, and I got a big kick out of that. Of course, he was master of ceremonies of the reunion deal, so he had the microphone. I think it was after we got out of 9th grade, and that following summer, Benny Lansky and Plachaki and I decided that we just had to do something special for the summer vacation, and so we took off for Duluth. Benny Lansky had a 35 Ford, and it had ball tires, and he had no spare. When I say he had no spare, he had a spare, but it was locked on the back, and he didn't have a key for it. But he picked up this 35 Ford from somebody that was a nice shape otherwise, and so anyway, we took off and went on up to Duluth, and of course we didn't have any money for motels or anything like that, just enough money for gasoline, you might say. So I can remember we stopped and slept on one of the overlooks overlooking Duluth, and it was pretty cold in the morning, but we got up and went down, and I think we washed our face and hands in the lake, and then we proceeded to head south into Wisconsin, and we went down to somewhere around Luck, Wisconsin, to visit Emmanuel Nordland, that had been a classmate in Silver Lake, and his family moved back to a dairy farm in Wisconsin there, and so we were going to visit him, which we did, and that we ended up sleeping in the barn that night, and then we proceeded on down and went to Blue Earth, and then over to Uncle Lee's in Easton, over by Wells, and about this time we're out of gas, and so I had a big deal, Uncle Lee, to sell us some gasoline, and he was still rationing, and he didn't want to do it, and but the farmers got pretty much all the gas they needed for tractors and farming, and so anyway, he finally coughed up 5 gallons of gas, and so we were able to make it home. One of the things about the trip also was the fact that that old car of Benny's had a bad muffler on it. It didn't sound too bad, but it had a baffle loose in there, and so when we'd be steaming along the highway and Benny would back off on the gas, this baffle and the muffler would make an awful rumbling, rattling, growling noise, and it really bothered me for quite a ways until after a couple of 100 miles I finally kind of figured out what it would be, and so then wasn't so worried about it, but was another experience. What it amounted to was we took off on a trip with an old car with a bald tires, no spare, no ration stamps for gas. We didn't have very much money, a few bucks, and then the noisy old car, and no luggage, and just gonna chase. More guts than brains. I forgot to mention that when we were in Blue Earth, we had stopped by Aunt Norma's, and big deal a meal out of her, and so that was another deal helped us get by. Of course, I was going to have the boys meet cousin Bonnie and Beverly Fierke, the twins that I had been telling them about, but fortunately for everybody, they were gone somewhere else for the day. But all in all, the trip was really a memorable experience for Ben and Don and I, and so we had something to talk about we're still talking about some of that crap we pulled. Kenny Carlson had quit school and gone out to the west coast around San Francisco, Oakland area, where they had shipyards. They were still in construction, and so he found work out there, I guess. And so we found out years later that he had gone out and stayed with Roy Miller and their family that had moved out there, and so he wasn't part of our group for I don't know, 2-3 years until he moved back home again. On another excursion, Donnie Pachaki and I took off for the North Shore in my that was my 36 Ford, and we drove the North Shore up to around Two Harbors somewhere, and maybe north of there, ways till we got onto Highway 1 or 2 or something like that went across to Ely. And from Ely, we decided to take the Echo Drive over to, I think it was supposed to go over to Orr, Minnesota. And it looked on the map like a nice deal, and the road was going to be a scenic route, and it was supposed to be about 40 miles. Well, I had about less than half a tank of gas, but that 40 miles was starting to stretch out up and down, and hills and around curves and around lakes, and so it if you'd think 40 miles and 40 miles an hour is only an hour's drive, but 40 miles when you only go 10-15 miles an hour and on a kind of a one-horse trail, and I think we met one car on the whole run. But the worrisome thing was that as it was an afternoon run, and I was concerned that it was going to start getting dark, and we come to a fork in the road, and it wasn't on the map, and so didn't know for sure that we'd taken the right road, which way to go, and that where our gas was starting to run low, and we didn't know out there without any road signs. We really had no idea how whether we were going to get anywhere or not. But we it had been a beautiful drive. It would have been nice if I hadn't had to be worrying a little bit about the direction and the gas tank and so on. But that was ended up being a kind of a nice trip Donnie and I made as when we had a sort of a few days of vacation time. Then it was probably the following year. Ray Anderson and I. No, it had to have been a year before. Ray Anderson and I took off in I still had my old Pontiac, and we were going fishing up to Leech Lake, and so we did that. We got up there and rented a cabin and rented a boat, and Ray had one of those one of the early Mercury motors. It was actually called a Wizard, put out by Gamble's or Western Auto, one of those stores. But anyway, it was a Mercury motor, and about I think it was something around a 7-horse, and we put it on that old 14-foot lav-strake wooden cedar boat, and we took off on Mille Lacs, and white cap waves or whatever didn't bother us. We we went where we wanted to go, and it was naturally, of course, fishing is always best on the other side of the lake. So we'd go, and we didn't really that trip. We really didn't catch many fish. We only got a few, but the part that was a little rough is that, of course, without wearing a large hat for the sun, or without heavy enough jackets, at times it was a little on the cool side, or the sun would be cooking us, and then we didn't have sense enough to take food and water with us either. So by the time the day was out, and Anderson had to fish till the last minute, by the time we got back, you had your butt full of hardboard boat fishing. But all in all, that we had a lot of fun, and pounded that old Pontiac up there and back, and it was again more luck than brains.